Nothing beats failing like trying. Never been afraid to fail. You know, I've not liked failure, but I haven't been afraid of failure.
What have you learned from failure?
Well, you know, a wise person learns not to do that again.
Don't repeat the dumb thing.
Don't repeat that dumb thing.
Yeah. Houston has had a lot of success in areas where others have failed. I think that your pioneering work in this space was super critically important to lay that foundation, right? Are there lessons learned from your experience here in Houston that could be replicated in other cities and communities?
I think so. I think the primary lesson is...
Welcome to Affordable Houser. I'm your host, Neal Rackleff. I've been working in the affordable housing space for over 30 years, and during that time, I've met some really amazing people doing some amazing work. I want to spotlight them and the great work that they're doing in this series. I get friends and associates who constantly ask me, what can we do to solve homelessness? The news today seems to be dominated by focusing on problems as opposed to looking at solutions. And the fact is that we know how to solve homelessness. There are solutions to these really vexing and difficult problems. What we need to do is study the people and the communities who have come up with best practices and figured out ways to crack the code to solve the challenges associated with housing people who have experienced homelessness. I was the housing director at the city of Houston at a time when chronic homelessness was reduced to over 70% in a 3-year period. I was just one member of a larger team involved in this effort. We learned a lot through trial and error and the relentless pursuit of good data to guide our decision-making. We were also obsessed with organizational efficiency and streamlining systems. Finally, we tempered all that with what I think was a genuine love and compassion for the great people that we served. Later, I served at HUD as an assistant secretary with oversight over key housing and homeless programs nationally. While at HUD, I was responsible for over $40 billion in grant funding, which included $2.4 billion to provide services to those experiencing homelessness in our country. I've spent half of my career practicing law as an associate and then partner at one of the leading national affordable housing practices. Recently, I started my own law firm and continue to work in the space. After 30 years, I've been fortunate to stumble across some best practices. I hope I can share some through this podcast. The first podcast series I'm doing is focused on some of the key people behind Houston's success in alleviating homelessness. To that end, I'm so excited to share this conversation I had with Pastor Rudy Rasmus with you. You're going to love him. He's one of my favorite people. He loves through action. He's been working with people experiencing homelessness since the 90s and plays a key role in the success we've seen with helping the unhoused in Houston. We started the conversation with a little bit about his housing story and how it impacted the trajectory of his own life. We'll then talk about how he started serving those experiencing homelessness and the great work that he continues to do today. I hope to highlight each guest's housing story so we can be continually reminded of how important this work is and how having stable housing positively impacts every other aspect of our lives. Affordable housing isn't just important to individuals, it sets the stage for healthy and thriving communities. With that, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your interest and passion in supporting affordable housing. I hope you really enjoy this episode. Okay, so welcome to Affordable Houser. We talk to the people who make affordable housing happen. And today I've got a great friend and sometimes spiritual advisor and mentor, one of my personal heroes, Pastor Rudy Rasmus. He's now Pastor Emeritus of St. John's United Methodist Church. I'm your host, Neal Rackleff. I've been doing affordable housing development. I've been in the space for about 30 years. About half of that time has been in the private sector as an attorney and consultant doing affordable housing development. The other half has been in government. I was the housing director for the city of Houston, an assistant secretary at HUD. So I've been around this arena for a while, and I wanted to start bringing forward some of the people that I've got to know over the years who are some of the brightest stars in this constellation. So let's introduce our guest today. To tell you a little bit more about Pastor Rudy, he has been doing some of the best work, in my opinion, in Houston since the early 90s, particularly helping people who've experienced homelessness. And part of what's cool about what you've done is that you've helped those who are the most in need, the most hardcore situations with serious addiction problems and serious mental health. This is no cherry picking of the easier to serve folks in need. You dove in and crossed ground that others have feared to tread. So I'm a huge fan, right? You recently retired as a senior pastor of St. John's United Methodist Church, and I know you're pouring your energy into your Bread of Life nonprofit now. So you're doing some really cool things with that, which I want to talk about. But let's put that on hold for a moment because I want to personalize this.
Okay.
So what I'd like to start with is your housing story, man, right? So what was housing like for you growing up? Where did you grow up?
Man, first of all, it's good to be here. Good to hang out with you.
Thanks.
And you kind of know what you're doing around housing, Neal. I want you to know that.
You're very kind. I appreciate
that. But, my housing story is kind of, it's really simple. I'm an only child of a hustler. And when I say that,
college-educated hustler.
A college-educated hustler.
One of your books, right?
Which was he was a phenomenal guy. As a matter of fact, he worked for HUD for 30 years. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
Yeah, he retired from HUD.
Oh, wow.
So,
cool.
So my dad was a very resourceful guy who knew how to make money. Subsequently, I never really had a challenging economic time. Really,
right.
I really did okay. I mean, but I lived in a neighborhood where everyone was challenged.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was this suburban, urban,
no, very
rural?
Urban. Very urban. About 4 minutes from downtown, Houston. So
okay, I know you were born at Herman Hospital.
Herman Hospital, right. And the neighborhood I grew up in is called the West End, Washington Avenue, Shepherd Drive.
Right.
I-10, those are the boundaries, Yale Street.
Yeah.
And it was an older black neighborhood that had really a lot of homeowners, but sort of turn of the century homeowners. These were folk who bought houses after World War II in many cases, or a little before World War II, and it was a typical urban community of the 60s and 70s. Kind of hard, a little gritty, but I had a
was it Independence Heights or kind of
next to it?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. My neighborhood really sort of was adjacent to Independence Heights, but
to the west.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and actually, yeah, to the southwest.
Okay.
And I think about my childhood, and I'm really reminded often as to how really fortunate I was. Average family had maybe 5-6 kids. I was an only child, so literally I got to go home in the evening and have some solitude. Most of my colleagues, my friends in the streets, went home to a house full of people.
So because you were just an only child and they were families with lots of kids?
Lots of kids in small houses.
Okay.
Yeah. So my childhood housing story was interesting in that my family owned rental property. So we had always been sort of in the property management business.
So single family?
Multifamily? Some single, some multi.
Okay.
And
your dad was a hardcore entrepreneur, right?
Hardcore entrepreneur. Yeah. And he really, matter of fact, I remember one of the early properties we bought was a little property out on 1960. Now, that's when 1960 was,
that was the country.
Freaking country. I mean, it was like a ride out there. No freeways going there. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere. And my dad, in this particular case, decided to raise hogs. All right? I was scared to death of them things, man.
And they're pretty gnarly.
They're gnarly, and they would get out every Friday night to party. Saturday morning, I knew what I was going to be doing, chasing the damn hogs. It was every time. So, but that was a rental property. That was the first one I was really glad it burned down. Okay, and it did. But from there, we started buying stuff, and we bought property never really sold it. My dad didn't really believe in selling a property that he bought, and I didn't really know why until much later. But he was really building an estate, and it was sort of the back door to estate building.
No, that's cool. It's very cool. So, what did you learn from that experience? How do you think it shaped you? I mean, people have been able to show with remarkable accuracy where people will wind up based on their zip code. You know, we know through a lot of good data analysis that has an amazing impact or an extremely profound impact on people's lives and their trajectories generally, right? What about you?
I think third grade reading scores were the more accurate determinant as to a person's success.
Oh, we really?
Yeah. If you can read about a third grade and read efficiently, there's a good possibility you're gonna make it.
Yeah.
If you can't read by the third grade efficiently, there's research is showing there's a good possibility you might not make it.
Right.
So if we take my early childhood education, it was solid. I mean, it was an urban school where all the teachers cared, and it was just one of those places.
That's huge.
I don't think zip code was a determinant so much as it was.
Was it more community?
More community, yeah. And how people lived in the context of those communities. So, for instance, in my childhood community, there was a sense of everyone was everyone else's kid.
Oh,
you know. So if you were in the streets doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, there's a good possibility somebody's mama was going to say something to you. And, somewhere along the way, we lost that kind of community. And that was many years ago. But, we figure I'm 68 now. So, I mean, that was I grew up in the early 60s in this particular community.
Right.
But I tell you, though, I think the one moment that changed my life was my dad was a school teacher making about $6,000 a year.
Right.
But in the early 60s, around 66, between 64 and 66, my dad became a Republican. And I don't know if I ever told you that, but he did become.
Was he kind of a Goldwater Republican? It was kind of that era, I think, right?
That was the era. And he actually, here in Houston, went to work for George Bush. George was the county chairman of the Republican Party.
Oh, yeah.
In 65. And during that time, my dad was the first black person on the GOP's payroll in Harris County.
Really?
Yeah. Subsequently, this network of black Republicans who were connected to white Republicans really looked out for each other. In the course of that, a guy in Dallas, Texas, Ross Perot, I've
heard of him.
had actually picked up one of my dad's friends and made him a millionaire. A guy named Joe Kirven. So Ross Perot picked up Joe Kirven, gave Joe, who's also a school teacher at the time, gave Joe all of his buildings to clean.
Wow. Launched
APCO building maintenance. Joe became a multimillionaire. And with Sam Wiley, I don't know if you remember Sam Wiley, but Sam was University Computing early days. Sam Wiley, Ross Perot put money with Joe Kirven and started a venture capital fund. They hired my dad to run the venture capital fund in Dallas. Subsequently, moving me out of the hood to Dallas.
Oh, that's a big change.
A big jump.
People outside of Texas, Dallas and Houston are very different.
Very different. So
culturally, what was that like?
So watch this, man. So I'm living in the hood in Houston. We moved to Dallas, and we moved into a high-rise apartment building in 1969.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is 1 year after, desegregation starts, after all of this. And here I am, a 12-year-old kid who just left the hood, now looking out of his window and seeing the horizon.
Yeah.
it was pretty life changing, and I ultimately, I guess, from that moment, got a glimpse of the other side.
And what do you think?
I said, it's pretty damn good. You know, as a matter of fact, some things you can't unsee. And once I saw how...
Oh, even I always think of that in a negative sense, like, oh, man, I can't.
Oh, no, man.
But in a good sense, too,
in a good
right?
sense, yeah. So once I saw how the other side was living, I made a decision from that day to live on the other side.
That's cool. That's interesting. And so I know you had told me previously about being in the band in your school, and sometimes I'm not treating you well, to put it mildly.
These were early days of desegregation. So in Dallas, I was one of 2 black students in a school of 1,000 students.
Wow.
Yeah, in 1969.
This was in middle school?
In Dallas, yeah, middle school.
Okay, yeah.
So
middle school kids can just be
it was rough, man.
Ruthless.
Yeah, not only was it ruthless, it was
just a crazy
age. It was
age.
relatively dangerous in those days, because this was a sort of a the western part of Dallas. I think kind of a mixed blue collar neighborhood,
right?
Neighborhood school, and the kids were pretty racist. But I learned something then, and what I learned was, solitude is okay. So I would get home in the afternoon from having to navigate a hallway where, I was called all sorts of, obscenities during the day. But I would get home in the afternoon, I'd regroup, and music became an escape for me. I played a couple of instruments, trumpet from the 2nd grade, bass guitar from the 6th, 7th grade, and those instruments became sort of a safe place for me. But when I think about the journey overall, Neal, I can see how how zip code does matter. Earlier I said it was really 3rd grade reading scores.
Right.
But zip code does matter.
Well, look, I found in my own experience that, I'm the first person I know of in my family to graduate from college, right? But my church community was full of people who were college graduates.
Right.
Growing up in Southern California, in Orange County. And so I kind of grew up just thinking, well, that's what you do. Even though I wasn't real academically inclined and didn't want to do that. But I had so many role models around me. The people I worked with that worked with me at church and youth groups and scouting and Little League and all this stuff. Pretty much everybody was fairly educated, right? And that shaped my worldview. I just thought that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And those influences it's amazing how those influences, later on, you look back over them and you say, wow. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, that guy, Joe Kirven, that gave my dad the opportunity to run Venture Advisors.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I went to work for Venture Advisors after I got out of college. I went to work for that company.
Oh, cool.
After my very short stint in banking. I had a very short stint in banking.
Right.
But I was thinking about how Mr. Kirven impacted me. So imagine this. I moved from Houston to Dallas, from the hood to a high-rise apartment. But I'll never forget, ever forget, even like 50 years later, I'll never forget the first meeting of Mr. Kirven. We met at a restaurant. My mom, dad, and I met his wife, and daughter at a restaurant. And I remember walking into this restaurant, and it was dark. It was like the lights were all really down.
Right.
And when we walked in, all of the person at the door greeted him. Hello, Mr. Kirven. So good to see you again. And then he took us to a table, and we sat at this table, big round table, and they handed us these big, like, it felt like poster boards, but they were the menus, right? Huh. And I remember looking at this menu, saying, "Wow, look at all of those options." And I remember my mom had already told me how to keep one hand, my left hand in my lap, use only my right hand. And then she told me to watch her in terms of which fork to pick up, right? So there was going to be a lot of forks at this table. And then I remember there being a white napkin
Right.
at this tablecloth. And what was more profound than anything was when the waiter came up to Mr. Kirven's table, he said, "Mr. Kirven, how you doing today?" And he said, and he called the guy by his first name. "John, so good to see you. Mr. Kirven, so good to see you too." And they were just chatting like they've known each other. And I'm sitting there, and then he said, "What would you like to eat?" And I'm picking off of this menu. And at the end of the dinner, I knew it was some money exchange somewhere.
Right.
But I remember Mr. Kirven picking up the bill.
Oh.
And I said, "Wow, man, when I grow up, I want to be able to pick up the check."
That's cool.
Yeah.
So self-reliance is something you talk about a little bit in one of the essays that I read in one of your books. That meant a lot to you.
Mm-hmm. Always has.
Yeah. Why is that important?
It's important because when you're 5'6" and you know you're not going to be 6'4",
Yeah.
you better be self-reliant. So coming up, I was always a little kid, the short kid in the hood, in the group, whatever. Right?
Me too.
Okay. And
I had friends that thought I was going to be really short for the rest of my life.
so
They worried about me.
Looking at the world differently, you see I always saw the need for self-reliance.
Yeah.
I give you case in point. So academically, my peers, my colleagues, never really knew how smart I was, right? Because my dad had always taught me. He said, "Hey, you never let them see you coming until you have arrived, and then wait a while before you make the announcement." Right?
That's great advice.
Oh, dude, it was great advice.
Yeah.
So here I am. I was always really smarter than my colleagues. I finished high school, I was 16.
Wow.
I finished college, I was 19. So, and I went through it. Boom. I skipped a year in high school, and I went through college in 3. I took 21 hours a semester. I got out. I got my first job. I turned 20 that summer. I went to work for Dallas Federal Savings. I was a terrible banker because while they were going, to lunch, and having iced tea, I'd go to my car and smoke a joint. I mean, it was like, I'm 20. What the hell? I mean,
Yeah.
it's 1976. All right.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but it was good. I mean, but my ride has always been different. So in terms of how self-reliance kicks in, I've just really never had, anybody else to count on.
That's cool. And sometimes people give self-reliance a bad rap nowadays, like, oh, nobody is truly self-reliant. And that's true to an extent. But wanting to be able to make your way in the world, to be able to take care of yourself, your family, is a noble goal.
Yeah, it is.
And it's essential.
You think about that no one makes it alone. Matter of fact,
Right.
Have you ever met Jack Blanton? Did you meet him before he passed on?
No, I think you've told me a little bit about him
Wealthy
before.
Houston oil guy. And, Mr. Blanton taught me just really a significant story around development in terms of fund development, relationship development.
Right.
A mutual friend of ours introduced us. I met him at his usual spot, Four Seasons, downtown Houston. We're at lunch, and at the end of lunch, he looks at me. It was my first time meeting him. He looks at me and he says, "So Rudy, what can I do for you?" And I'm thinking, damn, he just asked me what he could do. This guy can do anything.
Right.
I said, "Well, Mr. Blanton, really, I need your help building a health center for homeless people." He said, "That's a good idea, Rudy. How much you need?" I said, $1 million. And he said, "No problem." In 1997.
Wow.
I said, no, to myself, I'm saying, oh, hell, I should have asked for $3 million.
Yeah, but you had the guts and the vision and the faith to ask for $1 million. Because what I was just thinking was, it's so smart that you were willing to ask. I mean, so many things in life, you only get if you have the audacity and the humility to ask.
You got to ask, man. And that's what he taught me. He said, hey, Rudy, let me tell you. He said, first of all, nobody makes it alone. I said, yeah, you're right, Mr. Blanton. He said, let me tell you my story. So he told me, he said, years ago, I was a student at University of Texas. And I used to have to catch rides to UT from Houston. He said, but my church was St. Luke's Methodist Church on Westheimer. And I was at a dance one night, one weekend, and I met this girl, Laura Lee. And he said, we started dating, we married, her name was Laura Lee Scurlock, and I never had to catch a ride again. You ever heard of Scurlocks? They've got a tower in the medical center that looks like a hypodermic. Yeah. That's a short part of the story.
Right.
Yeah, but he said, none of us make it by ourselves, and he became a dear friend, and the land that we built the first Temenos on, the Knowles-Temenos Place,
right,
was land the Scurlock Foundation gave the Bread of Life.
Oh wow. So that's a great segue to, you started a church, planted it, I think was the term that you used in Houston in 1992, I believe. And I remember that because it's the same year that Krista and I came to Houston from California, from LA. And although I was still in law school, I wasn't doing the cool stuff you were doing, right? I was just trying to survive and get through school.
I was just trying to survive too. It wasn't cool.
Well,
it got cool later.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. You were doing this. You were doing this really good work before it was cool.
Before it was cool. It was hard.
So tell me, what drew you to helping people experiencing homelessness? You start this church, and right off, you start helping people who don't have anywhere to live, and the poor and the downtrodden. What was the impetus for that?
I was very critical of religion. Most of my life, up until the point I actually became professional clergy.
Right.
So at the point I became professional clergy, at that point, my, all the critique that I had given to organized religion, I had to answer. And one of the things I would always say is, the church should be doing more. That's what I always said before becoming a faith practitioner. I would always say the church should be doing more. So, it was only natural that if I became a professional clergy person, that I would have to find a way to do more. So,
and more, meaning more to help the downtrodden,
exactly,
the poor. I had a friend who used to quote Isaiah saying that we grind on the face of the poor, and that scripture has just come back to me over and over. We don't do enough. We hurt the poor,
right?
And inadvertently, it's not usually people are just trying to go out and make life miserable for their fellow people,
right?
But it happens as a byproduct of a lot of things. So you wind up focused on that, and I think that is super cool, because I do think that's one of the most important elements of Christianity.
Yeah.
Is if you look at what Jesus did, he spent a whole lot of time. There are a lot of verses talking about taking care of the poor and the needy and helping those who were less fortunate.
Yeah, he really did. And, for me, the mission didn't really, I didn't go looking for the mission found me.
How?
The mission was sleeping around the building when I got there. So we arrived at St. John's in downtown Houston, Gray and Crawford, and that was in those days, in the 90s, early 90s, that was still the dark and dangerous edge of downtown.
Right.
Lights went out on that end of downtown early. And it was really a tough place. But I had come from a tough place in ministry at that point.
Right.
So here we are in a tough place, serving really a tough people that I was very familiar with. So So we really just started providing a hot meal to the people who slept in and around downtown. That hot meal became from one hot meal a week. We ultimately started serving a hot meal every day.
Wow.
And not long after starting that meal did we realize that there were some other determinants causing these folk to experience this level of poverty. And today we call them the non-medical drivers of health.
Interesting.
The social determinants of health.
Right.
But in those days, we just looked at it as, okay, this person has needs more than just housing.
Right.
More than just nutrition. How about health? And, how about a place to wash their clothes, which could contribute to a healthier day if they were in clean clothes.
Right.
And how about a place to take a shower, which could contribute to an opportunity to potentially get employment. So before we knew it, we started providing those services. And then during those years, HIV was still really prevalent.
Right.
And still a killer of many, many people. We started reaching out and providing services to those who were either infected or affected by HIV. And, and from there, Neal, one step after the other, before I knew it, we were providing meals, had built this facility, providing place for the unhoused to be showered. Then we got a great grant from the federal government and started providing medical care and hired a doctor and a psychiatrist and a pharmacist. It was, those early years were pretty incredible, but they put us on a trajectory towards ultimately solving the problem. And this is the segue to housing for us.
Okay.
We were service providers to first to the chronically homeless. They were in dire conditions.
What do you describe dire conditions?
Mentally challenged was really a byproduct in those days of post-Vietnam experiences. A lot of the folk I encountered in the early 90s were 40-something-year-old Vietnam veterans who basically had just lost their way. That trauma, the trauma from that experience, from that war, literally shaped their trajectory once they returned home.
Right.
Couldn't necessarily reconnect with families, their wives, partners, their kids, and ultimately many of them ended up on the streets. Yeah. And then there were several other conflicts that occurred after that Desert Storm, the Iraq War.
Yeah.
There are other. But at each turn, the one thing I did know was, veterans were disproportionately experiencing homelessness, and a lot of the people I encountered had been in wars. From there, I also discovered that the byproduct of the crack pandemic, the crack cocaine pandemic, these were victims of. In many cases, hitting a crack pipe, smoking a crack pipe one time. Smoking a crack pipe one time sent them on a journey that in many cases they never exited.
Wow.
Yeah, because of crack addiction. Crack addiction literally kept a large swath of this homeless population homeless for many, many years. So between trauma, from military service, or trauma from addiction, I saw both of those collide, and in the streets of Houston, 15,000 people were homeless every night when I was providing these services.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It's a huge number,
which has come down dramatically.
The number's been impacted as a result of the reason we're talking today. Yeah. The number was impacted because of the availability of housing for this population.
Right. And so, Houston became the first major city to effectively eliminate veterans' homelessness, which doesn't mean that every veteran who was experiencing homelessness exited homelessness. Right. It meant that if they were willing to go into an available housing unit, that there was one available for them, right?
Exactly.
And, I do think that part of what we found is that a lot of people have this myth that, well, the homeless are homeless because they want to be. They don't want a house. Well, they may not want to live in a shelter with a bunch of rules that are difficult for them to comply with, right? And in a shelter where they're going to time out because they're temporary in nature in 3 months or 6 months or something, right? But the whole Housing First movement has shown, we've got mountains of evidence to show that when folks are offered a home with really no strings attached to it, that most folks will avail themselves of that opportunity, right? And so you were on the front lines, kind of in the vanguard of the Housing First movement and taking folks who are chronically homeless right off the streets and putting them into apartments and helping them to thrive, right?
Exactly. I think the effort of really providing a place for people to live is the genesis of ending homelessness.
Right.
So too often we stack all of these criteria. We stack criteria on criteria on criteria on this situation, and ultimately, people just like people who pay rent and mortgages, right? There are only certain stipulations that they would be willing to abide by put up with either. Yeah. So when we think about ending what is really considered, homelessness. The only way to do that is by first offering the house.
Yeah. And the amount of stability that provides somebody, like you were talking about earlier, people just sometimes don't think through the fact that, if you are experiencing homelessness, you don't have a place to wash your clothes, you don't have an address to put on a resume or a job application, how do you get a job? How do you just clean yourself up for a job interview, And so there are all of these elements that having a home will improve almost every other issue that a person's dealing with. It's not going to solve everything, but it will improve an awful, awful lot.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting when I'm talking to my friends who are Democrats about reducing homelessness. I focus on the compassion, the love, the humanity. When I'm talking to my Republican friends, I focus a little bit more on the finances and on the numbers, right? Because we have mountains of data to show that it costs far less to take somebody who's in chronic homelessness, put them into a modest apartment and give them good supportive services is way less expensive than it is to leave them on the streets. In Houston, we found that we were spending about $107 million a year between the city and the county to keep about 2,500 chronically homeless people on the street. The number was higher and dropped, and you look at that, and it was over $5,000 per month to keep people there, right? So you can get a pretty good apartment for $5,000 a month, and you do a lot more good. So,
in fact, give me $5,000. I'll move out. I'll move out of my current place. And I'm moving one of those. Give me 5,000.
That's right. Well,
I'll tell you what.
So why do you think, and part of what I wanted to kind of bring out in this discussion, or touch on at least, is Houston has had a lot of success in areas where others have failed. I think that your pioneering work in this space was super critically important to lay that foundation, right? And Houston's done a lot of good since then. What do you think, if you agree with my thesis, right? What do you are there lessons learned from your experience here in Houston that could be replicated in other cities and communities?
I think so. I think the primary lesson is housing first is really the only way to address the challenge that homelessness presents to any community. Providing a person a place to sleep, to live, is the first step in solving the challenge that rests in most of our cities in America.
Right.
But the one thing that we're going to have to ultimately speak to that big pink elephant in the corner, and that's mental illness.
Right.
And how we are addressing mental illness, and how we are beginning to, or at least think about policies that fund programs that can help support those who are mentally challenged by some way.
Right.
If we don't begin to do something about that, we are literally creating what. I think the stats show that the largest mental institutions in America are prisons, and then after prisons, those others are folks like myself and the agencies that I'm a part of. We provide housing to a lot of people with mental challenges. But the key is those people deserve a safe, decent, and sanitary place to live.
Well, and in addition to that, even for some people who feel like, well, I don't know if I want to, spend money on somebody who's not pulling their weight and this kind of argument, right? We can show them that you as a taxpayer are going to save money doing this, right?
You're going to save money.
You're going to save money. You just are. When you have folks that use the emergency room as their primary health care provider, and they go through this revolving door of hospitalization and whatnot for their normal health care. I remember Frontline did a documentary series on or episode on Housing First years ago, and they talked to a guy whose nickname was Footy, who was chronically homeless, living in New York, and they went to the emergency room nearby, and they said, do y'all know who Footy is? And they're like, oh, yeah, we know Footy. They're like, really? And they're like, has he been here very often? They're like, yeah. And he had literally been to the emergency room near where he hung out or lived on the street like over 100 times in the previous year.
Right.
It is astronomically expensive.
Exactly.
It's extremely inhumane for this gentleman to have to suffer that kind of indignity. But the cost is ridiculous, right? And so instead, if this gentleman is living in a modest apartment surrounded with supportive services that can help him to get to the doctor regularly, take his prescription medication as needed, that would be helpful. I will also say when I was at HUD, I went to LA about 5 times, right? Because at the time there were approximately 500,000 people experiencing homelessness in the U.S. 50,000 of them are in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Wow.
Mind-blowing. Skid Row is crazy. It is just how big it is and how extensive it is. It just breaks your heart, when you go out there and see it. So I took Ben Carson down there, and we worked with a nonprofit that worked with a lot of women who are experiencing homelessness. And while mental health and addiction problems are a huge element of homelessness, there are a whole lot of people now who, just because the laws of supply and demand with housing becoming so expensive, there are a lot of people who don't have those issues. I remember introducing Ben Carson to a lady who was about my mom's age, suburban housewife from, the Southern California area, and her husband worked in aerospace or something and lost his job, or he passed away, I'm sorry. And so she didn't have enough money to keep up the house. She's living on Skid Row as homeless, right? So it's not just a mental health and a addiction problem. It's spanning a much larger gamut. And if we don't take substantive action to reduce the cost of housing and make it more available, and just having more units is going to drive the cost down, right?
Exactly.
Then we're going to continue to see this issue spiraling out of control.
Yeah, one of my close friends lived on Skid Row for many years.
Oh, really?
We went to college together. After a military stint, he ended up back in L.A., fell on some hard times, and probably for the next 10, 15 years, he lived on the row.
Wow.
I brought him to Houston to hang out with us indefinitely, and he stayed probably 6 months in a place I got for him. Ultimately went back. He had housing when he went back, and today he's doing perfectly fine. As a matter of fact,
that's great.
He came down to my retirement service.
Really?
Yeah, sure did.
What a success story.
It's a success story for sure.
And you probably got a lot of those.
You know what? I've had a chance to see the byproduct of caring in the lives of people who needed somebody to care, and that's been the ongoing narrative for our work over these last 32 years. You just care and then put some tangible effort behind that caring, and before you know it, you can impact a person's life indelibly to the point where they are on their feet and doing their own thing for the rest of their lives.
Which is very cool. Now, when you talk about caring about people and then doing something, can you talk a little bit about I know it's part of the Bread of Life services that you provide food and toiletries from Procter & Gamble. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that's grown, and what you all are doing on a regular basis there? Because I think it's very cool.
Over the years, we have really worked in three areas. I call them the 3 H's. One is hunger, and it's addressing food security issues that are real for a lot of people, regardless to how many times I ate in a restaurant today. There are a lot of hungry people out here.
Yeah.
The other is housing, for sure, and the third is health, and impacting the health care of people who could easily fall through the margins. When we look at how our work impacts on the food budget, like for food insecure people, we have an incredible partnership with Procter & Gamble through Matthew 25 Ministries. It's a Procter & Gamble partner. They do about $600 million a year in charity around the U.S. and the Caribbean. It's a disaster relief agency that focuses really on places where climate change is impacting those communities adversely. Subsequently, their relationship with P&G, Procter & Gamble, sends us about $30 million a year in product for us to redistribute to the community.
So what kind of product is that? Toothbrushes, toothpaste?
Procter & Gamble makes. Everything
they make,
Procter & Gamble.
They make a lot of stuff.
They make a lot of stuff. And the idea is we can use that stuff to help a family reduce their product supply budget, increasing the amount of funds available for food.
Or housing insecurity.
So you can imagine there are little things on our just normal budget that we can't eat, but we need. And those supplies come our way. We in turn make those available to, matter of fact, last year, 240,000 people.
240,000 people.
Yeah.
You helped.
We helped.
That's a lot.
Stuff. That's a lot of people, man.
That's a lot of goodness.
That's probably
a lot of goodness from a guy who's 5'6".
Well, let me tell you a 5'6" story.
Said from a guy who's 5'7".
We'll tell you 5'6".
At one point, I think I was 5'8", but I've shrunk.
Well, I'm telling you,
it's a bummer.
I'm gonna show you my driver's license because one day I walked into the driver's license place to renew my license.
Yeah.
And
Did they question your height?
They questioned my height. The man asked me. He said,
"That's not cool.
How tall are you?" And I asked him. I said, "Hey, you gonna let me pick?" All right. Neal, I can't make this up. I'm telling you. So the man said, "Yes." I said, 5'7". All right. So on my license for a couple of renewals, I was 5'7". then the Lord touched me, and I went back to 5'6". But I'm 5'6" now.
But you were a giant of a man.
Thank you, man.
Intellectually, spiritually, and most importantly, in terms of doing, getting out and accomplishing good things for people who need it. And I think you kind of epitomize something that I've tried to do. When I was the housing director of the city of Houston, I tried to stay laser focused on the people we serve. Mm-hmm. You got all this political craziness going on around you, people wanting you to do this, that, and the other thing for dumb reasons sometimes. And I tried to, working with friends like Joel and others, we tried to say, how do we get these houses built for the people who need them? I don't really care about all this noise. And And that is something that you've made an art form, and that's tough to do.
Yeah. My dad always told me growing up, nothing beats failing like trying. Nothing beats failing like trying.
Oh, interesting.
So I've never been afraid to fail. I've not liked failure, but I haven't been afraid of failure.
What have you learned from failure?
Well, a wise person learns not to do that again.
Don't repeat the
Don't
dumb
repeat
thing.
that dumb thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, if you go this way and you run into a bear, all right, the next time you go the other way, right? You don't go into the bear. Matter of fact, my dad had another adage which really has helped me a whole lot. He said, when your head is in the lion's mouth, don't scratch his ass. All right. I'm gonna tell you, because you know what happens?
No, I've never been in that situation, thankfully.
The lion closes his mouth.
Oh, that's not good.
It's not good. So when you find yourself in that position, you said, hey, diplomacy. So my old man taught me, one, to not be afraid, and two, to be nice.
That, I heard a church leader say a while ago, I think there's a whole lot of things you got to do to get to the kingdom of God. But he said, of all these things, he gave a list of like 3. This was kind of his outgoing sermon. And as he was retiring, he said, but of all those things, I think you got to be nice.
You got to be nice.
It's like, It's such a simple thing. And it's so overlooked today in this polarized world of people yelling at each other.
And people have a hard time with being nice, But for me, just playing nice in the sandbox. Neal, you've been around me a long time.
Yes.
You've seen me through some difficult situations with some characters.
Yeah.
In the development world. I mean, you're going to bump into characters. But at the end of the day, I want, if nothing else, when my life is over, I want people to say 2 things. Man, Rudy was all right. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, he cared.
Well, and to me, the greatest evidence of care is what you've done. I mean, you have lived your life in a way that I think is other focused and beautiful. So thank you for that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
So I guess wrapping up, and thank you very much for your time here. I know you're a super busy guy, and I'm grateful for you taking time to hang out with me.
Can I say something about busy?
Oh, please.
People
please.
are really not as busy as they would like people to think they are. The reality is, if you got a friend who says, let's hang out, what you should do is hang out.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And nowadays people wear busy like a badge of honor.
Busy like a
man,
badge.
I'm busy. I'm so important. I'm so
bullshit.
cool. Yeah, I kind of agree.
We should leave that in.
And we will.
Bullshit.
We will, man. This is the real deal. No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And people get so enamored with themselves and their own to-do list that they think it's just, some kind of divine calling to just be running around like crazy people and not paying attention to the humans around them who need them.
There's 168 hours in a week. 168 hours in a week. You would think in 168 hours, my friend Neal says, hey, I'd like to talk to you for an hour. Man, I got 167 hours left after we finish.
No, and you've done that for me a few times when I desperately needed it. I needed guidance.
For me too.
Thank you, man. So last thing I would ask you, or what, I don't know if you want to talk about Knowles-Rowland House, your most recent development that should be closing today.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Knock on wood, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
So over the years, I've just been blessed to have friends who care about the things I care about, and when those friends have resources, and they're willing to put those resources in the place where those are the things that I and we mutually care about,
right,
then people get helped. So many years ago, in 1999, There's a girl group, Destiny's Child.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, little group. They had a little success.
Yeah.
But two of the members of the group, Beyonce and Kelly Rowland, from the proceeds of their first big hit, the first big hit was entitled "No No No."
Right.
From the proceeds from that song, they helped build a gym in downtown Houston. We called it the Knowles-Rowland Center for Youth,
Which was attached to your church.
attached to the church. Yeah.
Right.
So for many years, that gym served as not only a recreation facility, but it served as a gathering place for senior adults. It served as a warehouse for goods and services during disasters. It served as a place where we slept 150 unhoused people every night for about 5 years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a housing first experiment.
Wow.
So a person would get to the door at 6 p.m. We'd let them in, give them a mat. They'd sleep to 6 a.m. They'd leave. We'd clean up, and they'd come back again the next night. And so that building over the years, just its useful life had expired, and it was time to do something different with it.
Right.
What we decided to do was make it housing, and thanks to our friends in Harris County politics,
Yep.
and our friends Beyonce and Kelly Rowland, we are getting ready to convert that to 31 units of permanent supportive housing. That's 31 more people who don't have a place to sleep right now. We'll have a place to sleep once we are finished. So, a $10, $11 million project is going to happen, thanks to you and others who have really shepherded us through.
Tried to do my part.
Through a process, and it's just a beginning. When I think about Houston, the Houston I grew up in, starting in 1956, seeing this town that I really love become a community of more than 5 million people, that I'm reminded that there's not only a place for me, but they're a place for a lot of people who don't have anywhere to go right now, and nowhere to sleep right now, and nowhere to eat right now. And as long as I'm around and I can do something to help and impact that group, then that's what I'm going to do.
You're a good man. And Houston's lucky to have you. You've been a leader in this space, and I'm grateful for your service. I will say, too, I took a look at a couple of your books. Mm-hmm. This one entitled I'm Black, I'm Christian, I'm Methodist, edited by Rudy Rasmus. It's several essays from people who are Black, Christian, and Methodist, right, and telling their experiences, and it includes you have a great essay in here. That was beautiful. And then I know you wrote a while back, Love, Period. Mm-hmm. So that's a good way to punctuate the conclusion of this interview. Thank you very much, my friend. It's been great visiting with you.
It's been good being here.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right.
The sequel to this one is